It's my distinct pleasure this evening to introduce Steve Bertjens. He is the state biologist, as says here, from NRCS, and he is going to discuss habitat and some new changes at the NRCS. So take it away, Steve.
Thank you, and I appreciate the invite. Looking forward, I think we all are, to a point when we can do this in person. All right, hopefully you're viewing my title slide. All right, so I've been with USDA for 21 years, 11 of that as a state biologist. And I've been fortunate to be able to work on some projects with Trout Unlimited. I will say up front, I am not a fisheries biologist, so we will not have a session of stump the fisheries biologist, because you'll stump me. So my expertise definitely is more into the terrestrial end of biology. And so in my position, I have a lot of hats. I also serve as the CRP coordinator for NRCS and also our NEPA coordinator. So those of you that run into projects with some of those threatened endangered species like northern cricket frog, I'm the guy that gets to deal with those. So my title slide, opportunities for multi-resource conservation benefits associated with stream restoration. That's just the title. Says I wasn't exactly sure what I was going to talk about, and it sounded good. So there we have it. But no, I'm going to cover quite a few, I think, different topics that'll be interest to you. Some of those may be a bit disappointing, but also I think we have some really great opportunities that you will probably be the first group to hear about some of those opportunities. So I'll get rolling. And if at any time, if my screen is flickering or something, let me know, and I can try to turn off VPNs or other things to hopefully make that function better. All right, so first one to talk about the financial assistance through NRCS and the primary mechanism that we've been able to work with Trout Unlimited in the past to get restoration practices on the ground has been our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP. So EQIP provides that financial incentives for producers for a whole range of conservation practices. That can be anything from conservation tillage, cover crops, buffers, filter strips, and of course, trout stream restoration practices. Our standard for trout stream restoration is Conservation Practice Standard 395. And so we can do a lot of good things with that. And I'll talk about that later. But in addition to the financial assistance, we can also provide technical assistance to producers in adopting conservation practices for a lot of the trout stream restoration in the driftless area, or I should say, so the driftless area is split up as far as NRCS areas into two different areas, Southwest and Northwest. And as it just happens to be, La Crosse is the northernmost part of that Southwest area. So we are lucky to have out of our area office in Richland Center an exceptional engineer that knows way more about trout restoration than I do. And so that's Mike Dreschmeyer. And if you've been on some of our NRCS projects, I'm sure you've met Mike, but we are lucky to have Mike, and I defer to him often. It used to be that, pretty much you had to be a person that had agriculture to be eligible for EQIP. That's not necessarily true anymore. Pretty much you can just have forest, be a non-industrial private forester. Of course, crop, you can have just pasture land and you're eligible. even small farmsteads, and then we lump everything in with associated ag. So there really isn't a land use that's not eligible. So one program we have that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is this Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And we abbreviate that RCPP. And so Trout Unlimited is on their second RCPP now. So that is a good thing, because what that does is for EQIP, if you have a project in your county, you have to compete with everybody else in the fund pool. And so you may or may not get funded because you might get beat out. We rank these projects, all EQIP projects get ranked. And so we were ranking stream projects against cover crops and things such as that. Well, when you have an RCPP, there essentially is no competition because you control that pool of funds. So there is literally millions. I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in the last, what they're calling the RCPP 2 for the driftless, I believe that was like $5 to $6 million. And so that there's still plenty of money left there. So that is the good thing about RCPP. It brings the dollars and the technical assistance. So the RCPP is fairly large. So the first one that was submitted was a much smaller area. But now, if you take a look at kind of, well, it should be all the stuff in blue, but it's hard to see the blue because it's overlaid with kind of a greenish color. But as you can see, it goes all the way over to Dane County, over to Grant, up Mississippi River, and all the way up into Dunn and Barron County. So it's a fairly large area now. But I will say historically, the vast majority of the work has occurred from La Crosse County south. And I would, and for the most part, I would say the greatest amount of work is usually, La Crosse, Vernon, Crawford, Richland, and Grant. That's just Iowa too, that's kind of been the historic. But as you can see, we have a lot of different RCPPs in the state, covers like 82% of the state. But I will say Trout Unlimited is the only one that is entirely devoted to stream restoration. So one thing I wanted to discuss today is, as an agency, we're evolving as far as stream restoration practices go. So I might say evolving, but I do have to warn you, we're kind of in reset mode for a little bit. And the reason I say that is because some of you may be aware that we just recently updated the primary conservation practice standards that we utilize for trout stream restoration. The big one being stream stabilization. That's our CPS 580. And I'm sorry, I got the I got the wrong number in there. That should be 395 for stream restoration. And so there was a technical team put together, and there were there may have been several. I know of at least one Trout Unlimited representative that was on those committees. So so it was a long process to get those revised, and a lot of discussions about how we move forward. So the rollout of these new technical standards and the guidance documents that come with those for restoration planning actually is occurring next week for our staff. So so we, as an agency, still haven't rolled that out and trained our folks. So that's why I say it's going to take us a little bit to get up to speed. So kind of a summary is the direction we're going is going to be an emphasis on less hard armoring of large stretches of stream. So less riprap. And not that we can't do riprap. We're still going to utilize that where it's critical to have solve major erosional issues. But we're going to limit it to those very severe sites. And I believe one of the indicators they're going to use is that it must, have at least a half a foot of lateral recession a year. So, and we can do a lot of that just by looking at air photos. So, we're looking at a lot of different ways. Doesn't mean we're gonna do any less work. It just means we're gonna start changing a little bit of the way we do things. And I'll show some photos of what we've been doing and already to make some of those changes. But like I said, it doesn't mean we are going to do less trout restoration. We're just probably going to use less rock. In a big part of what occurred in those revisions of those standards and a lot of the emphasis for our agency, and this is a theme I'm sure all of you are hearing too. I know when Jeff Hastings was putting on, the annual meeting in La Crosse for Trout Unlimited, that, a lot of speakers were talking about that, reconnecting the stream with the floodplain. And that's kind of a new mantra. So our overall planning has slowed a little bit regarding getting those projects on the ground. However, after we get this construction season on the way and we get that experience, we fully expect by next year to be back in full swing. All right. So a couple things that I just wanted to relate to you that helps NRCS when when working with partners like Trout Unlimited and landowners in general, when they're looking at NRCS funds. I will say the more lead time we can get, the better. And this kind of is a rule of thumb. I usually tell folks, assume it's going to take a minimum of 2 years from the date we do the walkover to the completion of the project. And that's assuming everything goes well. Could possibly take up to 3 years, but I'm sure many of you already know permits can be an issue at times. T&E species that we have to deal with can be a time and can be a problem. And obviously getting contractors can be an issue. So the sooner the better. So both EQIP and RCPP technically have a continuous sign up. So a landowner can go into our office at any time and ask to fill out an application for a contract. However, those contracts are only approved once a year, and that actually just occurred about 2 weeks ago. So, if you're aware of a landowner you're working with that applied, they should be hearing pretty soon about that approval. So one thing that is part of the agreement with NRCS is that the landowner needs to agree to the conservation and construction plan, as well as performing the operation and maintenance. And that's pretty important, as we know. Now, obviously, things like riprap and some of the other in-stream structures that we installed, that rarely is there a whole lot of maintenance associated with that. But there can at times obviously be some bank erosion issues and maybe things like that need to be touched up and reseeded. So we just always want to make sure that the landowner knows that there is additional operation and maintenance. The other thing is that landowner becomes essentially the construction superintendent. We give them the money, and then they are responsible for hiring the contractors to fully implement the conservation plan. And I will say this is one service that I believe kind of sets Trout Unlimited, ahead of a lot of other organizations, in the fact that many a times, TU is willing to act as that construction superintendent for the landowner. And that's huge. All of us know, landowners, farmers are busy the way it is, and that additional assistance with getting those projects underway, it's very critical to the partnership and getting these things done. And so I talked about operation and maintenance. The other thing is too, if any of these, it's not that everything's on the landowner. If something fails, then we can simply draw up another agreement to solve that if we have riprap that washes out. I mentioned that the pre-approvals are done and landowners should be getting to know. The other thing that we always emphasize too is that because there can be a substantial amount of dollars in a project, that the landowner check with their tax advisor. If Trout Unlimited is going to be involved with the construction and have duties associated with that, then we have a form that would need to be filled out. And it's just called a release of information. Pretty easy procedure, but that allows the landowner to essentially give Trout Unlimited the permission to move forward with hiring the contractors, overseeing some of the project, and like I said, general oversight. So that's fairly easy process. Okay, so what's the steps? The normal steps would be landowner or Trout Unlimited contacts NRCS with interest in a project. Then NRCS will perform a site visit, and we complete the resource assessments because we have to determine if there's a resource concern for the project, and to justify the restoration activities and determine eligible practices. Number 3 is the ideal, and I don't know that this happens all the time. Since I live in Grant County, they asked me to go out on some of their walkovers, but the majority I've been on, it's the NRCS district conservationist. It's a representative from the TU chapter, the landowner, if oftentimes, and the DNR fisheries biologist. And we all walk, and the fisheries biologist provides a lot of good information. Also, at times, there's some practices that NRCS can't cost share on, and Trout Unlimited might say, well, we'll cost share on that. And at times DNR will say, well, we'll cost share on that. So that is the best case scenario when that works out that way. And then, so after things are kind of squared away, the landowner would submit an application to NRCS, and then the NRCS area engineer would review those recommendations and provide comments. And then NRCS surveys the site, performs all the analysis, and develops the preliminary design and all the job sheets and everything that goes along with that. And works with the landlord to get the permits started. And I will say the permits are the responsibility of the landowner, but we can assist them with some components of that. So the landowner then hopefully receives notice from NRCS that it's been approved, and then we make the final tweaks to the design plan, and the permits are submitted to DNR if they're not already in place. And then the landowner selects a contractor, and the construction occurs. Like I said, at times we're held up on restrictions. Like I said, northern cricket frog, oftentimes we got to work around that. So that can delay the time of year we'd like to implement it on. And then NRCS certifies it as meeting standards and specs, and then we issue payment. And I will say there is the ability to, some landowners on these larger projects, like that occur in stream restoration, the landowner prefers us to send the check directly to the contractor, and we can make that arrangement also. All right, so I mentioned that we're evolving as we're starting to better understand the importance of multi-resource planning. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about in the rest of the presentation is some of those things that go into thinking about multi-resources and multi-benefits when we're installing these practices. So I'll have a few slides and talk about habitat management within the stream corridor for obviously for trout and other non-game species. And I mentioned before, critical component is reconnecting the stream with the floodplain. So we'll discuss that briefly. And then I'll talk about, and this is something that is fairly new that I'll dive into too, is that with more and more research that goes on, we're starting to learn more about the importance of having native trees and shrubs in those riparian areas, and what the benefit that provides for flooding and buffering the stream against both flood and climate change. And then lastly, talk a little bit about buffers. So I tell you, there's a lot of things that Trout Unlimited obviously can be proud of, but literally, this is not just a pun, literally Trout Unlimited wrote the book on non-game habitat. Kudos to Jeff Hastings for, getting Bob Hay and getting this put together. This is just a great document. If you haven't seen it, I hope that website still works, thedeerrestoration.com, but I think you can Google it and find it, but just a great publication on non-game. And the other nice thing is why this was a great collaboration is, a lot of times I'll hear from folks and they're saying, well, you know what we really need for stream restoration? We need this practice. Well, what this took care of, if you want the practice, then NRCS, we have to have a technical design. And so that's what they did. So the photo kind of to the right is the technical design on how we would do this. So that's a huge benefit in allowing us to contract those practices. So I'm going to talk about now some of these projects that are, have benefit to trout and other species. And I got to say, this is one of my favorite practices. It's super cheap. Contractors get good at banging these in, and we refer to it as a backwater refuge area. And this is a practice we can cost share on. So as we're, looking at what we want to do in that stream, there is cost sharing. These, a lot of times, like this one, you can imagine as this bottom floods, it is going to silt in. So these obviously are not permanent structures, but as wetlands change and places fill in, but it's just incredible. I know UW-Platteville was doing some research on the use of these backwater refuge areas and just found incredible populations of amphibians and reptiles, primarily amphibians. And this is also one of those practices when I talk about northern cricket frog. One of the mitigation practices we have is we can put in these, and then they call them frog ponds. But so these are really easy. Like I said, it doesn't take a contractor long. It's probably one of them practices we pay more than what it actually costs, but that's okay. Usually, these are they're not super deep, but we try to get them to come out at a fairly flat 8-to-1. But like I said, as you can see, this the way this is laid in there, we tried to get them off the channel as much as possible, and the key is to keep them connected. So like I said, there's we've been seeing some of these. We're seeing wood ducks in the fall using them, and so it's just one of those great practices that's easy to fit in. And another one of my favorites that is the backwater hook, and I think this is kind of a designer's preference on these. You'll see them in some streams, and you won't see them in others. But I think these photos possibly are Iowa County. Like I said, it's just the idea is that if you don't have backwater, and oftentimes we don't on these cold water streams, it's a way to, inside that hook to create a little bit of backwater refuge, an area for for trout to ambush prey. And so again, that the benefit there to amphibians and turtles and a lot of different non-game species is pretty important. And so I like even more the bottom picture, because there's where they kind of did the same idea with the hooks, but they used just trees that they removed as part of the stream restoration. And I'll have a little bit more on that. We often refer to those as log deflectors, but we can use, and that's one thing I think we are getting a lot better at, is using that natural material, putting it back in the stream. So why not? You know, there's no cost of having a tree brought in when we already had to remove the trees, you know, to get the restoration in. And again, like I said, this is a design, so makes it, since we have standard drawings, it really makes our life easier. And some things, you know, maybe you don't think about, although I've been seeing more and more bat boxes on some of these trout stream restorations. I just think that's a great idea. Again, another practice we can cost share on. Landowners really like them. And, you know, we're all, I'm sure, well aware of, you know, the demise of many bat species. So oftentimes they'll put 3 in one location. It doesn't have to be. They can be on a pole. And the idea being to put them in 3 different directions is that bats at times, they're real temperature sensitive. So they may move from one to the other. So the other thing, you do wood nesting boxes, bluebird boxes, owl boxes, you name it. We can do that. This picture is because we do offer, for the tribes, they can actually osprey nesting platforms, but obviously we don't have those kind of body of waters to justify our osprey in the driftless. A wetland restoration. Again, this was a project actually that we had to do to mitigate, again, because we had cricket frog issues, but this just worked in really nice in an old oxbow where we could do a shallow scrape. And it's hard to see in this picture, but it was originally connected to the stream. That's pretty important. But this one, I think, silted in a little bit. So in low water, I'm not so sure it was connecting anymore. But low cost, high benefit. Any of these microtopography features, like I said, ducks, amphibians, lots of benefit there. And it applies to, we can do this in both drained or degraded wetlands. So if there was tile or something like that, we can certainly break the tile or do a ditch plug if needed. Not that we have a lot of ditch plugs in Southwest Wisconsin, but other areas that can be important. So this is a favorite slide of mine. And for those of you that have fished Bora Creek in Grant County, that's where this is. There is a big sign right, actually, I believe it's Bora Creek Road, and you get to the sign and it, big sign that says DNR fisheries restoration that they did years ago. But there was, so their restoration, I think, was done in the 80s. So what we had was, you know, and this is fairly typical in a lot of areas, we just had a big continuous run. And there really wasn't any habitat in that run. It was shallow, you know, no, very little woody debris in there to provide any kind of ambush area for trout. So we came in here, and in this case, we probably put a few more log deflectors than what we needed, but this was still when this was kind of relatively new, and we used all the material from the site. But as you can see, where before that thalweg was just right down the middle of the stream, you know, a slower moving stretch, and I tried to identify with those blue arrows. Now we're bouncing that thalweg all over the place. And then, you know, just right, you know, the log itself, we leave the root mass on there. So obviously that whole root ball is just great habitat, ambush areas for trout, just areas in general for invertebrates. And then we kind of create a little bit of backwater also as part of these. And then the log itself serves as a basking log for snakes and turtles. And overall, a series of these will reduce stress on the bank also. And, I think the big thing we accomplished here too was, this very slow moving stretch, and we narrowed it up with these log deflectors. Not any rock used in this. This was all just natural wood with a little bit of bank shaping. And then to kind of seal the deal, this landowner enrolled into the CRP program, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. And so he's getting paid to plant and maintain this prairie. So we've got great pollinator habitat. Obviously, you can imagine all the insects that potentially could be adding to that stream for food. So it's kind of a really nice situation where, and there's also a DNR easement on this also. So like I said, this one kind of checks all the habitat boxes. And like I said, I'm pretty excited about using this more. We did have a couple major floods after this was put in, and we didn't lose a single log. Actually, now sediment is starting to build up around them a little bit, and it's starting to look more and more natural. This is certainly something that I think is a tool. As we use less rock, we can certainly use this. And so pretty much the same type of, we're designing them the same way. There is a reference, I guess, in here to calling them tree top brush bundles, but the terminology I tend to hear more is just a log deflector, whether we're actually deflecting current or not. But the key is, and why these stay in place, is that they're keyed into the bank 8 foot. So they're not going to move. And there is an art to placing them, not getting them too high that they catch, a lot of material during a flood, and not getting them too low to the point that they really don't serve the purpose of providing that basking log or beneficial habitat for trout. Now, obviously, there's concerns of, if you're in a larger stream that might be canoed or, kayaks, but, in most of these smaller trout streams, people are pretty excited about this. And I will say, I talked to people that fish this stretch, and they say that the population has increased incredibly in this stretch after they did this. It was a lot. I think they did 100 of these in a little over a quarter mile. So there was a lot of wood put into that stream. All right. So the one topic that I want to talk about that we, the big one is the importance. It's so important. I used important twice, I guess, in the title, but I guess I'd proof that. But why we want to reconnect the stream to the floodplain. And so I'm going to kind of refer to this photo, and obviously that photo is a straightened stream, and we come across those at times, but this picture kind of epitomizes what we're dealing with in the driftless area, and probably not new to most of you, but what we refer to as entrenched streams. And just through hundreds of years of erosion and deposition in these stream bottoms, in these floodplains, we now have built up that floodplain floor, so our banks are higher. And in flood events, the water can't get out because we have these super high banks. And so the big debate is now, can we restore a stream without reconnecting the floodplain? Well, we certainly, I think we can restore fish habitat, but we can't truly restore the stream without reconnecting that floodplain. And, at times it's not going to be feasible either. And, just because this is a straight stream, and it's entrenched, does that mean it's not good for trout? Well, I can tell you this is in Buffalo County and there's trout in that stream. But our ability, to do much for work is extremely limited. Eventually, if we let this stream do what it wanted to do, it's going to try to meander itself. So yes, the stream entrenchment is a major area in the driftless area. I'm sure you've seen those pictures. I know I have, of a farmer building a fence on top of where a fence used to be. Kind of just that gives you an idea of how much sedimentation has occurred in some of these floodplains. So, the reason the entrenchment is an issue is because that stream during high flows and flooding it's got to get rid of its energy somewhere. And normally it would do that by just spilling out of the banks and then the flow slowing down and dissipating its energy. But when these streams become so entrenched that the water can't get out, the energy's got to either do one of two things. It's either got to erode the bank, and then if we armor the bank, then it erodes the bed. So our best option is to reconnect that stream to its floodplain. So what are we talking about? Well, ideally, most of our projects, we're shaping those banks back at a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1 slope. In all actuality, we probably need to get to more to an 8-to-1 if we want to really connect that stream. I'm sure most of you can have the question like, so what do we do with all that spoil material? And that's a real issue. That's why, are we going to be able to reconnect the floodplain on every stream? Nope, that's a lot of material. I kind of, envision that if we had to shape this stream back to an 8-to-1, you can kind of just see where the green ends and where the crop field starts. We would be shaping that bank, the top of that bank would be way over into that crop field to get to an 8-to-1. So I think the reality is we're not going to be able to do it everywhere. And there might be stretches of stream that, there won't be much we can do, but there's going to be definitely opportunities. So the other thing is too, and there'll be more to come on this, but because we understand the realities of all of the spoil that could be generated by trying to shape back to 8-to-1, NRCS now has a new standard called open channel. And the best way I can describe it, you're really you're constructing what they call an inset floodplain. So imagine, if you will, on our picture, what you would do is right about, looks like they had burned this ditch at one point, right about where that black line kind of meets the green line towards, the bottom third of the stream bank. You would actually cut the bank there and kind of make a trapezoid. And what the idea being is you're creating an artificial floodplain for the stream to spill out into, so that it can alleviate some of that energy off of the bank. I will say I'm not an engineer. I have not seen this in practice, but our state engineer believes that this is a practice we can utilize in the future. So, as we get some of this in the ground, obviously we're going to have some field days, but this is one of the new things that's being looked at. So like I said, the reality is, we're not going to be able to shape everything to where we want it to. So few new tools. This is just kind of a laundry list of some of the things we can do for non-game habitat. I'm not exactly sure the stream here. And this is also a good picture, I guess, when I talk about entrenched streams and, the really tall banks, that bank opposite of where they're putting that turtle hibernacula, that's kind of a good, representation of sometimes what we face. So yeah, I mean, the turtle hibernacula, basking logs, backwater refuge. We talked about the boxes. Been some interesting things done with swallow mounds, and talked about wetland restoration. Of course, we can do prairie plantings and things like that. So, just trying to relay backs that not every site's as difficult as what I had showed with that straight and stream. And, here's a site, and I honestly, I believe this is Vernon County, but if somebody knows where this is at, you can correct me. But this was a situation where, versus that other picture, and you look at this, the banks weren't nearly as high, but there were some banks. And so shaping here wasn't a big deal. So we easily achieved our 8-to-1 here. And you can imagine we have a storm event, it starts to flood, it can easily spill out and alleviate that energy and out into the floodplain. That's what we want to get. We want to get those large storm events that spill out into the floodplain. So like I said, this is I think kind of just a picture to provide you of what we can do and what we have done. It's just like not every site is amenable to this. So the other thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of new, that we really haven't promoted this in the past, but I have heard in the past from Trout Unlimited members and from Wisconsin DNR biologists and even some NRCS staff that have said, hey, just give us a practice in situations where the banks are fairly stable, but we've got so much box elder, it's shading everything out, that if we get the box elder out of there, we get some vegetation growing, we know the streams will stabilize and, we'll have better habitat, because box elder really doesn't provide much of a habitat. It shades everything out. So what we came up with is a new practice, and I'll talk more about the practice, but it's essentially a forested riparian buffer. And it really checks all the boxes. It's great for water quality. It absorbs and filters nutrients and sediment. Obviously, you get the erosion control because it once the flow gets out of the bank, it slows it down. Wildlife habitat, and then you get a lot of different benefits for wildlife like woodcock, deer, and pheasant. So what are we talking about with these? The picture on the right just kind of gives you a little bit of an idea. We really look at two zones. One is the stream bank itself, then zone 2 is that floodplain, and zone 3 is optional if we need a grass buffer to protect the woody planting from sedimentation from an upland crop field. So I'm sure what's on a lot of folks' minds, and when I talk to this about friends of mine that are trout fishermen, they're like, you do know I still want to fish this. If you put woody stuff all the way down in the stream, how am I going to fish it? And so the answer is we do not need to run, as the previous picture showed, we don't need to run the trees all the way to the water's edge. At a minimum, we can just put like some shrubs at the top of the bank. And the idea being getting those roots in place to create some stability. So it doesn't have to be trees, it can be shrubs, and we certainly can leave plenty of room so that we can access for fishing. So this could be a combination of native trees, shrubs, and grasses. And the objective is not to establish a forest. So we're not looking at those kind of densities like that box elder was creating. We don't want to shade everything out. We want to actually have enough opening to get some herbaceous plants. And so I talked about the zone 3 one. So why, another reason why it's important. So I stole this from someone else's presentation, but it really kind of hits home when we're talking about, how we're creating, food sources for microinvertebrates. There's two sources, and one is coarse particular organic matter. So that's leaves, that's twigs and leaves. So these riparian forest buffers can provide that, that source of organic matter. And then you can see, and then you get the whole process of going between the shredders, breaking it down, and eventually becoming fish food. But then on the right-hand side too, even the particular, fine particular organic matter, part of that, in addition to algae, is also leaves. So it's really, those woody branches, the leaves, it's really the building blocks for all the energy inputs. So we accomplished that. And then the big one now, this is in the news every day, and I think this was presented at one of the previous TU meetings in La Crosse, the ones that there was a speaker talking about how the models are predicting that our cold water streams are going to warm up. And, they may be warming up to a degree where we can't even consider brook trout management, and even maybe be worrisome for brown trout. So in some cases, that additional shading might be needed to maintain these cold water streams. And obviously this is much more important as we get in northern Wisconsin, where, a lot of those streams are not true cold water. They're just cooled water. And without the trees, we have issues. Matter of fact, we are actually working on projects due to emerald ash borer. Some of the streams in northern Wisconsin they're dominated by black ash, and the black ash is dying, and that is causing more sunlight to get to the stream, and we're losing that cool water. So this is definitely another practice we have to utilize. So we have a brand new payment scenario. You're probably one of the first groups to hear about this. And it is that scenario that folks were asking for. How can we move the box elder and get some different vegetation that's beneficial? And so this is paying about $7,000 an acre, but it's lumping a whole lot of things in at one time. Remove the box elder, replanting, but we're only replanting to about 400 trees per acre. So like I said, we're not building a forest. We're just trying to get a buffer. In most cases, this is assuming in most cases that the toe of the stream is stable. It's going to be for some of those where you maybe have sloughed banks, but you need some other protection. And this doesn't. And so we're looking for sites for this. There has been some interest. Like I said, I know the fisheries biologists from DNR are excited about this. We can all think of a site that's, maybe even on a restored stream. So this is the great thing about this is we don't even need permits, because if we're, if it needs shaping, we're doing the shaping above the ordinary high water mark. So we don't even need to get a DNR permit for most of those, or at least if we do need a permit, it's a much easier to obtain. So, like I said, we're looking towards this. It's good money, but it can be expensive. So, like I said, we know there was a few of these projects submitted to the TU RCVP, so we are excited to get those in, and then when we do, we'll certainly have some field days. This is a slide that I'm sure many of you have seen, and it just again points out, the multi benefits in trout stream restoration. With I will say though, as we talk about less rock, we're probably not going to see projects like this where it's all continuous rock on a stretch. We'll still be doing rock, like I said, in critical areas where there's erosion, but a little bit less of that. So I think the last thing I have, so I do have a little time for question and answer, is we're always looking for opportunities for pollinator habitat. And I threw this one up there because this is a buddy of mine. And so when you're working with landowners and trying to get them to look at things, this particular project was funded through our conservation security program. And that was paying $2,300 an acre. And so, but you had to keep it in 5 years. But my buddy, he's all corn and beans, he's like, I can't make that much money. So he put in, 25 acres of pollinator habitat. And so, there are many more opportunities that makes it more feasible, I think more financially feasible for landowners to look at some of these practices. And like I said, we can do this with buffers. We can do this, with filter strips, we can do a lot of different practices. And so this is just, I think my last slide, this is me standing on those log deflectors in Bora Creek. And so I'll just finish by saying, the planning process for stream restoration from an NRCS perspective is evolving. We're going to ask your patience with us because we might not be able to get projects done at the speed we did before, but we're learning. And I guess I want to finish with the fact that that the Trout Unlimited NRCS partnership is recognized nationally, and there's been numerous awards that have been granted for that. And so I just want to say we appreciate that. As a biologist, I want to see more money going to streams and all kinds of wildlife practices. I'd much rather see that more than cover crops and things like that. So let's keep spending that money and doing great work. And thanks to all of you for everything you do in helping restore trout streams. That's what I got.
Wow, thanks a lot, Steve. That was great, especially that new payment scenario. That'd be a great chapter project. We already do brushing, and be interesting to do some planting as well. That's terrific. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Dick Duplessis has one.
Steve, thanks for your presentation. It was great. And I have a question, but I'm somewhat of an outsider to having a firm base of knowledge. Is based more of an impression, and my impression is that the Southwest area seemed to work a lot better, more cohesively with the DNR than our Northwest area has. And do you see the standard 395 as kind of smoothing out those differences, if in fact they exist?
Yeah, I would say that's a very true statement that you made. And I think a lot of the reason why there's a difference in the Northwest is just because we've been doing this so long in the Southwest. There's some, I can think, I've been with the NRCS for 21 years. I remember projects, when I just started my career long ago, when, there was those projects going on. And so there's a lot of experience and there's a lot of trust that happened through the years between the fisheries biologist and NRCS. And I think as we build that partnership, and I think it's just as we start building that trust with DNR, we're going to get there in the Northwest. It's just going to take a bit. And I will say, I think TU has a big role in that because, if we're butting heads, somebody needs to be the mediator at times. But, and there is the other one kind of major difference too, is that, we're kind of blessed in the Southwest that we have, there's various contractors that can do this work, and they don't have that same situation in the Northwest. So DNR is actually doing quite a bit of the work. And so that definitely creates a little bit of tension, I think, with NRCS, because we want to be their partner. We want to be the good guy. But as you guys know, when you're out on the construction and you got the survey rod in your hand and you're telling that contractor, it's like, okay, it's got to be deeper. It's got to be flatter. That can create a little bit of issue. So I think it's going to take a little time. I do know there were some practices that they were asking for in the Northwest that we hadn't traditionally used in the Southwest, and some of those are being granted. And I will say the Northwest was the one pushing for that riparian improvement scenario. So hopefully that happens. But yeah, we're still working on that. And I do believe you're right that what the revisions and the standards and the guidance documents are going to kind of make it so that we're all using the same playbook. And so hopefully that will shore that up a little bit.
Good, thanks.
Okay.
This is Erickson. I have a question for you, and it's about the series of artificial floodplain. And I can't remember what you call that when you jutted it on a very steep bank. Can we go back, and can the landowner get funding to go back and maybe put a series of those little juts that I wish I remembered what you called it.
Open channel.
Open channel. Okay, so say that it was you did something back 10 years ago, and it's 3,500 feet, and someone decided that maybe 4 or 5 of these would be great for the floodplain issues. Can they apply for a grant to get that project done?
Yeah, just because you've had restoration before doesn't, preclude you from getting another contract. And I have to say that practice is so new that I wish I could tell you right now what the tool was going to be to determine, when we apply that, when we don't. But like I said, the training is actually next week. So I'm hoping I can tune into that. But I've never seen, that concept of, halfway up a bank. It's really, like I said, halfway up a bank and kind of making that artificial floodplain. And obviously there's going to be some situations where it doesn't fit. Maybe, probably in streams with that have low banks, it might not fit so much because maybe shaping it out to the 8-to-1 is better. But I would say we've got a lot of, or anyway, I'm sure our engineers got it figured out, but I have not really been brought up to speed to it. And like I said, I kind of wanted to just throw it out there as something that's coming. And but yeah, on any project, we go back out and we can reevaluate it using our assessment tools to determine, even if we did restoration. For example, we never, years ago, we never used wood. And so, we may have stretches of stream where it's like, well, yeah, it makes, for the non-game purpose, it might make sense, to come in and put some log deflectors or brush bundles or something like that, just to add that woody component.
Well, the other part of this scenario, it'd be advantageous for a 73-year-old guy to walk down this bank where you cut it out for the floodplain so I can get to the water. So I really don't care about the flooding. I just want to be able to get to the water without getting hurt.
That is a benefit I didn't think about at first, but that is, I think we would all appreciate that.
That's what I'm here for.
Access is important.
Okay, Dick DePlessy's got another question.
Yeah, sorry, I can't think of everything at once. My memory's gone with my hairline. But you said that there could be situations, as I understood it, you said there could be situations where an NRCS approved project is going on that's involving the DNR or TU, maybe the 3 of us together, and we want to do or add, I guess my question is, can we add in-stream habitat work that maybe isn't in your NRCS plan, but we think would be benefit to the resource if we pay for it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the answer is yes. Because we ran into that in the past, and what the engineers said, as long as it's on the design plan, we're good to go. What they don't want to have happen is, we're out there with the contractor and then we're like, oh, you know what? boy, it'd really be nice to have a rock deflector right there. Or it'd really be nice to have a series of boulders in that area, because what the engineers had told me is, you know, when they're putting together that design, and now the other thing that these standards updates are going to force us to do is, it's going to really, on all these projects, we're going to have to do what they call a fluvial geomorphology study. And especially on the sites where there's going to be more rock. So a lot goes into that stream classification process and documenting all the structures. And so when they're a lot less willing to modify that design plan, because it's based on all of that fluvial geomorphology. So but as long as we get, and like I said, that's why I think the walkovers are important to get everybody, because as long as it's on the design plan, it's a go.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Steve. That was great. And it really does clarify some issues we've had over the past few years, and some really exciting new stuff. It's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You bet.